This is the moment the entire Iran war hinged on a single word from Moscow, and Washington said nothing back. If you looked at the news feeds on Monday morning, you would have seen the usual flood of conflict updates. Ship movements in the Strait of Hormuz, drone footage from the Persian Gulf, posts about Iran's fast attack boats, analysts debating ceasefire timelines, all of it real, all of it important, and all of it missing the one thing that actually mattered. While every major newsroom was fixated on the military theater, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov walked up to a podium in Moscow and delivered what may be the most consequential diplomatic sentence spoken in this war. He said that Russia's proposal to physically remove Iran's enriched uranium from Iranian soil and store it inside Russia as part of a broader peace arrangement was still on the table, offered to both the United States and regional powers, still waiting, still unanswered. As of today, Thursday, April 16, 2026, at the time this is being written, the American government has not accepted that offer, has not rejected it, has not offered a counter. The silence from Washington is now approaching 72 hours. In this deep dive, we are going to break down exactly what Russia is offering and why it might actually work, why America's silence is not a neutral act. It is a decision, why that decision, depending on what is driving it, either ends this war before April 21st or tips the region into a second, more dangerous phase, and what the next 120 hours will tell us about where this conflict is actually going. The story everyone is watching is ships and drones and ceasefire talks. The story that actually decides the outcome is a proposal sitting unanswered in a diplomatic inbox in Washington. And the silence around that proposal isn't nothing. That silence is the war. 3 years ago, when the current American administration took office, the official position on Iran was simple, loud, and absolute. Iran would not be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. Not now. Not in 10 years. Not ever. The president said it at rallies. The Secretary of State said it in Senate hearings. The National Security Advisor said it in policy papers. It was the one foreign policy commitment that enjoyed rare bipartisan backing. Stop Iran's nuclear program. Full stop. The plan was to use maximum economic pressure, the most comprehensive sanctions regime in modern history, to bring Iran to a negotiating table where it would agree to permanently dismantle its enrichment program. The logic seems solid. Squeeze the economy hard enough and any government eventually bends. But the cost of that plan was never just economic. It required treating Iran's national identity as a bargaining chip. Iran's nuclear program, whatever its actual military dimensions, had become bound up in something deeper than geopolitics. It had become a symbol of sovereignty, of resistance, of the right to exist on their own terms, in a region where outside powers have always had opinions about how they should be governed. Telling Iran to permanently surrender its enrichment capacity was not just a security demand. For a significant portion of Iran's population and leadership, it felt like a demand to surrender the idea of Iran itself. Hardliners in Tehran argued from the very beginning, America will not stop at uranium. Capitulate on enrichment today, and tomorrow they come for something else. Predictably, the opposition inside Iran to any deal that looked like total surrender grew louder with every round of sanctions, not quieter. The pressure strategy was supposed to break Iranian resolve. Instead, it calcified it. The administration gambled that economic pain would outweigh political pride. That bet was wrong, and the consequences of that miscalculation are now being measured in the lives of thousands of people across the Middle East. At approximately 11:40 in the morning on February 28, 2026, the first wave of strikes from Operation Epic Fury hit Iranian airspace. Nearly 900 coordinated strikes in 12 hours. Iranian missile systems, air defense networks, military command infrastructure. Within the opening hours, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed. Dozens of senior officials died alongside him. The operation was the most significant military action in the Middle East in a generation, and it was sold to the public as a surgical, targeted campaign to eliminate Iran's nuclear threat once and for all. Then the school was hit. A single missile, targeted at a naval installation near Bandar Abbas, struck a girls' secondary school on the adjacent block during morning classes. 170 civilians died in those minutes. Most of them were children. The images spread before any government could manage them. For 48 hours, there was silence from the White House. Then there was a statement about the tragic complexities of modern warfare. Then nothing. Pause. While that silence from Washington was spreading internationally, something else was also happening. Iran's retaliation was already in motion. Hundreds of ballistic missiles launched toward Israel, thousands of drones dispatched across multiple vectors, and the order that changed the global economy overnight, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the 33-kilometer corridor through which 20% of the world's daily oil supply passes, went dark. Within 72 hours, oil prices had spiked 18%. Within a week, they were sitting above $95 a barrel. Every household on every continent that uses energy, which is every household on every continent, felt it. While the oil markets were absorbing that shock, diplomatic channels were also simultaneously collapsing. 21 hours of talks in Islamabad produced no agreement. The core issue, as it has always been, was the uranium question. Iran has approximately 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity, not yet weapons grade, which requires above 90%, but close enough that the IAEA has publicly described it as perilously close. America's position going into those talks was a 20-year suspension of enrichment. Iran's counter was 5 years, after which it would reassert its sovereign right to enrich under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. 20 years versus 5 years. Those positions were not close, and the talks collapsed on that gap. And then, the day after the talks failed, President Trump told the New York Post that he didn't actually like the 20-year proposal his own team had put on the table. His exact words, "I've been saying they can't have nuclear weapons, so I don't like the 20 years." The American negotiating position, already rejected by Iran, was now also being rejected by the American president. No one in Washington publicly explained what the new position was, and in that vacuum of clarity, Russia made its move. According to sources familiar with the diplomatic back channels, Russia had been watching the Islamabad collapse with considerable attention. The moment the talks fell apart, the Kremlin saw something, a gap that only Moscow could fill. A senior diplomatic source in the region, speaking on the condition of anonymity to an international outlet, described the internal Russian calculation this way: both sides were stuck. Iran couldn't hand its uranium to America. That would look like total defeat. America couldn't accept Iran keeping its uranium. That would look like total surrender of their war aim. The only entity capable of bridging that gap was one that both sides could deal with without either side losing face publicly. Russia understood that it was that entity. We have learned from sources close to the Kremlin's communications team that an internal review of the offer's strategic value had been completed before Peskov made his public statement. The review reportedly concluded that custodianship of Iran's enriched uranium would give Moscow extraordinary leverage, not just in this conflict, but in every subsequent negotiation with the West on any topic: Ukraine sanctions relief, NATO expansion discussions, energy policy. Every time Washington needed assurance that Iran's uranium was secure, it would have to go to Moscow and ask. In a private call that took place 2 days before Peskov went public, key figures in Russia's foreign policy apparatus reportedly reached the same conclusion. The uranium, if Russia holds it, becomes a permanent geopolitical instrument, not a favor, not a peace gesture, a card. And so Peskov walked to that podium and said simply, "The offer stands." The phrasing was deliberate, calm, almost indifferent. The offer stands but has not been acted upon. Russia was not begging for recognition. Russia was announcing its indispensability, and in Washington, the response was silence. Here is the question at the center of all of this: why hasn't America responded? Follow the internal logic. There are 4 genuinely different reasons a government goes silent on a diplomatic proposal, and each one leads to a completely different outcome. The first is that America is seriously considering the offer, running it through the full national security apparatus, and hasn't yet formed a consolidated position. That silence would be productive. It would be the silence before a deal. The second is tactical. America understands that saying anything publicly about Russia's proposal gives Iran information about American leverage. If Washington signals interest, Tehran knows the uranium transfer is genuinely on the table and can use that as a bargaining chip. Saying nothing keeps Iran uncertain. That would be strategic silence. The third is bureaucratic. Rubio's team, Hegseth's team and the White House are not aligned internally on whether Russia's custodianship actually solves the nuclear problem. Different factions hold different views, and no public statement can emerge because there is no agreed position to state. That silence is dangerous. It eats time, and time is exactly what this ceasefire does not have. The fourth is the most alarming kind. America has quietly decided the offer is insufficient, that moving the uranium to Russia without dismantling the centrifuges doesn't actually solve the problem America went to war to solve, and is choosing not to say so publicly because rejecting it outright would collapse the last remaining diplomatic structure before April 21st. This matters because Trump's Tuesday comment points directly toward the fourth option. He didn't say, 20 years isn't enough, let's negotiate. He said, Iran can't have nuclear weapons. No years, no timeline. The implication, if you follow it honestly, is permanent, total elimination of Iranian enrichment capacity. Russia's offer does not deliver that. Russia's offer removes the stockpile. It does not touch the centrifuges. And Iran has stated clearly, repeatedly, and at every level of its government that it will not permanently surrender the right to enrich. Those two positions are not bridgeable by any uranium transfer, no matter where the material ends up. Here is the domino effect of what happens if this silence holds through April 21st. If the ceasefire expires without an extension or a deal, the legal framework restraining American military action runs out. Trump has been explicit. He is considering resuming strikes if the blockade does not produce Iranian flexibility. Defense Secretary Hegseth publicly referenced Operation Midnight Hammer, the June 2025 strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, at a recent press conference. The message was clear. If Iran does not deal, America reserves the right to finish what it started. If America resumes strikes, Iran activates capabilities it has held back. The IRGC has stated publicly that it considers any American military vessel in the Strait of Hormuz a ceasefire violation. Iran still has anti-ship missiles. It still has naval mines. It still has fast attack boat formations in the Gulf. The decision not to use them has so far been a political choice. On April 22nd, that political constraint dissolves. If Iranian retaliation resumes, oil markets, which had begun pricing in a possible resolution, receive a definitive signal that this conflict has no near-term end. Columbia University's Center on Global Energy Policy has projected that prices will not fall significantly until the strait is fully reopened and damaged facilities are repaired, a process that could extend well into late 2026. The countries absorbing the most pain are not wealthy Western economies. They are nations across South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia that cannot buffer oil shocks with strategic reserves or subsidies. Now, where is the diplomatic community in all of this? Turkey's foreign minister is engaged. Egypt's foreign minister is flying to Washington this week to meet Rubio directly. Pakistan's Prime Minister Sharif says mediators are still working. That level of simultaneous diplomatic activity does not happen around a dead negotiation. It happens around one that everyone believes is still salvageable, barely, but salvageable. And Russia's uranium offer is sitting directly in the middle of all that activity, publicly on the table, publicly unaddressed. Either the key that unlocks everything or the piece America has already decided doesn't fit the lock. There is an image that keeps coming back when you look at where this conflict stands today. A bridge, half built, both ends raised. The gap between them narrow enough to see across clearly, but wide enough that no one can cross without something connecting the two sides. Russia's uranium offer is the cable being offered to span that gap. The question is whether the engineers on the American side of the river will accept it, modify it, or quietly walk away and let the gap stay open. The bridge was never about charity. It was always about who gets to say they built it and what they get to charge for the crossing forever after. You can spin a narrative about why the ceasefire failed. You cannot spin what oil at $95 a barrel does to a family in Lahore or Lagos. You can claim the silence was strategic. You cannot claim it was free. Reality does not respond to press releases, and 6 days is not long enough for silence to hold its shape. So where does this stand right now? A ceasefire that expires in less than 6 days. A uranium offer sitting unanswered for 72 hours. A president who has publicly rejected his own negotiating team's position without replacing it with another. A diplomatic circuit that includes Turkey, Egypt, Pakistan, and Oman working simultaneously to find language that lets both sides claim enough of a win to sell a deal at home. And Iran, having already absorbed 46 days of strikes, the death of its supreme leader, and 170 civilian deaths, including children, telling the world it still has unused capabilities. As we move into the final days before April 21st, watch for one specific signal above all others. Not what Trump posts, not ship movements in the Gulf. Watch whether the State Department says anything at all about Russia's uranium proposal. Because the first moment Washington acknowledges that offer publicly, whether to accept it, reject it, or propose conditions around it, tells you more about the next phase of this war than any military briefing. Either a deal is reached before the deadline, a ceasefire is extended, buying more time for negotiation, or the war resumes, and the second phase begins in conditions significantly worse than the first. The single variable most likely to determine which of those outcomes happens is the answer to a question that has been sitting on a table in Washington since Monday morning. What does America actually think about Russia holding Iran's uranium? That question sounds simple. It is not simple. Behind it sits the entire unresolved architecture of this war, what America declared as its goal versus what Iran will actually agree to, what Russia is genuinely offering versus what Russia is strategically gaining by offering it, and what the watching world concludes about American leadership in a moment that is already being called one of the defining diplomatic tests of this decade. 6 days. The silence will not hold that long. Something breaks before April 21st. Pay very close attention to what breaks first. Subscribe. We will be monitoring this in real time. If America responds to Russia's offer in the next 48 hours, in any direction, we go live immediately. This is not routine news coverage. This is the hinge point. This is where the decision gets made. Stay close.